I leaned back in my leather chair, the kind that hugged your shoulders just enough to remind you you'd earned it. Outside the glass wall of my office, the New York skyline shimmered under the late afternoon sun, all steel and ambition. The hum of the city felt like background music to the life I had built. My silk blouse still carried the faint scent of the perfume I spritzed that morning, and the gold chain around my neck rested against my collarbone, steady, grounding. My phone buzzed on the desk. One glance at the screen, and I froze, lips curving into something between a smirk and a sigh. The calendar notification read, "Meeting with Jonathan Reeves, 4:30 p.m. Jonathan, my old boss. The man who had once brushed aside my promotion as though my hard work was invisible. The same man who told me, without flinching, that I was better suited for support roles, while handing my dream position to someone less qualified, less committed, less me. And now he was walking into my boardroom, not as my superior, not even as my equal, but as the subordinate of my business partner. My manicured fingers tapped lightly against the polished mahogany table. The irony was almost too rich to process. My heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with anticipation. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times. Only this time, reality promised to be sweeter. I was 26 when I first realized how cruel ambition could feel in the wrong hands. Back then, my days started before sunrise and ended long after the janitors turned off half the office lights. I poured myself into projects that weren't even mine, covering for colleagues, cleaning up mistakes, staying late because I thought this is how you earn respect. That winter, I had convinced myself my promotion was inevitable. I had the numbers, the results, and the drive. My name had circulated in meetings, and even a few colleagues had whispered congratulations in advance. My heart carried hope the way a child clutches candy, sticky, sweet, impossible to let go of. The day Jonathan called me into his office, my hands shook as I smoothed my navy skirt, praying I looked professional enough. His office smelled faintly of cedarwood polish and stale coffee. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Emily," he said, flipping through a stack of papers, "we've decided to go in a different direction." I blinked, heat crawling up my neck. "Different direction?" He sighed, finally lifting his gaze. "You're talented, no question. But the new role requires a certain presence. Someone who can command a room. You'd be better suited supporting whoever takes it." The words sliced through me like glass. Supporting. As if my only place was in the shadow of someone else's spotlight. I wanted to protest, to demand he justify why a less experienced man, Mark, the one who barely managed his deadlines, was suddenly deemed more commanding. But my throat burned, clogged with unshed tears. I nodded, forcing composure, though inside I was crumbling. My palms pressed against the arms of the chair to keep them from trembling. That night, I called my grandmother. She had always been the voice of reason when the world tried to shrink me. Her laugh was raspy from years of late-night storytelling, and even over the phone, she made me feel less alone. "Baby," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "never let someone else measure your worth with their broken ruler. If they can't see you, it doesn't mean you're invisible. It means they're blind." I pressed my fingers against the small silver locket she'd given me years before, a delicate piece I wore almost daily. Inside was a tiny photo of her holding me as a child. That locket became more than jewelry that night. It was a promise. The next morning, instead of walking into the office with my usual eager stride, I handed in my resignation. Jonathan's eyebrows rose, clearly surprised. He muttered something about me being emotional and assured me I'd regret it. But I didn't regret it. Not then. Not now. That decision was the first brick in the foundation of the life I would eventually build. Walking out of Jonathan's office felt like stepping into icy air without a coat. Sharp, unsettling, and yet strangely refreshing. The weight of his dismissal clung to me for weeks, but beneath the sting lived something else, a hunger. I didn't have a detailed plan, just a fire that refused to go out. My apartment became both sanctuary and battlefield. The kitchen table doubled as my desk, covered with sticky notes, empty coffee cups, and my grandmother's locket resting near my laptop like a silent cheerleader. Nights bled into mornings as I researched markets, scribbled ideas, and taught myself things I never thought I'd need to know: tax codes, digital marketing, contract law. Money was tight. I remember surviving on ramen packets and dollar store coffee, my fridge holding little more than almond milk and stubborn hope. There were moments I thought about crawling back, swallowing my pride, begging for a steady paycheck. But every time, I pictured Jonathan's face, calm, dismissive, patronizing, and I dug in harder. The turning point came when I met Rachel Matthews, a woman who had clawed her way to the top of her own company and didn't flinch at the word ambition. I met her by chance at a networking event where I stood nervously near the buffet, clutching a cheap blazer around me like armor. Rachel noticed me fumbling through small talk and pulled me into her circle. She had this way of looking directly at you, as though she could see past your nerves and into your potential. After hearing my half-formed business pitch, she tilted her head and said, "You're raw, Emily. But raw can be shaped. Are you willing to bleed for it?" I nodded before I even fully understood what she meant. Rachel became my mentor, my toughest critic, and the first person outside my grandmother who believed I could be more than someone's assistant. She challenged me ruthlessly. My presentations were messy, my numbers weak, my vision too vague. But she also opened doors, introducing me to clients who took a chance on me because she vouched for my grit. My first client was a small tech startup in Brooklyn. They needed branding help, and I stayed up for 3 nights straight polishing their campaign until my eyes burned. When they wired that first payment, barely enough to cover rent, it felt like a fortune. I celebrated with takeout Chinese and a bottle of cheap wine, whispering to myself, "This is just the beginning." Over time, the wins stacked slowly. One client led to another. I learned to negotiate contracts without flinching, to walk into meetings without apologizing for existing. Every setback, a deal that fell through, a client that ghosted, became fuel. But I never flaunted my progress publicly. My social media showed vague snapshots: a cup of coffee on my desk, a sunset over the skyline, maybe a passing mention of busy weeks. I wanted no one, especially Jonathan, to know the empire I was quietly constructing. There was a certain satisfaction in working in silence. While the world thought I was licking my wounds, I was sharpening my claws. Each spreadsheet, each strategy session, each tiny victory became bricks in a fortress no one could tear down. And then, years later, when the contracts grew larger and the stakes higher, Rachel introduced me to Daniel Carter. A man who didn't just see my talent, he respected it. Together, we forged something bigger than either of us alone. A partnership. A company that would one day have Jonathan sitting across from me, no longer my gatekeeper, but a man knocking on my door. The boardroom always had a certain weight to it: sleek marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a silence that hummed with unspoken power. The kind of room that made people sit straighter, speak sharper, tread carefully. I had sat in countless rooms like this before, but never as the woman who owned half the table. I adjusted the sleeve of my cream blazer, smoothed my skirt, and glanced toward the door just as it opened. Jonathan Reeves walked in. For a brief second, his confident stride faltered. His eyes locked on me, and I watched a dozen emotions flicker across his face: confusion, surprise, discomfort. He quickly masked them, plastering on the same smile he used to wield like a weapon. "Emily," he said, his voice carrying forced warmth. "It's been a while." I smiled, measured and steady. "It has." Daniel, my business partner, extended his hand. "Jonathan, glad you could make it. Please have a seat. We've got a lot to discuss." Jonathan sat, his posture rigid, his gaze darting between Daniel and me. He tried to regain control of the moment, speaking in that authoritative tone I remembered all too well. But it didn't land the same way. Not when the balance of power had shifted so drastically. The room was alive with subtle details: the soft hum of the city outside, the abstract art we'd chosen for the walls, the faint aroma of espresso from the machine down the hall. All symbols of the world I had built, one that Jonathan could neither define nor diminish. I let him talk for a while, watching him stumble through his pitch. His words were polished, but his confidence wavered every time his eyes flicked to me. He knew, maybe not the full story, but enough to sense he was no longer sitting across from the young woman desperate for his approval. Finally, Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Before we go any further, Jonathan, I want to clarify something. This is not just my decision to make. Emily is my partner. Every major move in this firm is ours, equally. The word hung in the air like a bell. Partner. Jonathan's jaw tightened. His gaze snapped to me, searching for some explanation, some loophole that might make this sting less humiliating. Partner, he repeated, voice low. I met his eyes directly. Yes. Co-founder, equal stake. Everything you see here, this company, this team, it's ours. I'm not anyone's assistant anymore. Silence. Heavy, deafening silence. He swallowed, the realization settling into his bones. I saw the memory flash in his eyes, me, years ago, sitting in his office, hopeful, shaking, waiting for validation that never came. The irony was poetic, almost cruel. I didn't realize, he muttered, his voice softer now. No, I said gently but firmly. You didn't. The power in that moment wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about proving him wrong. It was about standing in my own truth without flinching. For the first time, he had to see me, not as a background player, not as someone supporting someone else's vision, but as the woman whose decisions could shape his future. Daniel cleared his throat, moving the meeting forward, but Jonathan barely spoke after that. His hands fidgeted with his pen, his confident facade cracking at the edges. Every now and then, his eyes drifted to me, as if still trying to reconcile the woman before him with the girl he once underestimated. When the meeting ended, I gathered my notes calmly, slipping my grandmother's locket back into place beneath my blouse. Jonathan lingered, clearly unsettled, searching for words that wouldn't come. I didn't need them. The silence between us said everything. Jonathan requested a private conversation after the boardroom cleared. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the easy arrogance I remembered so well. Emily, he began, tugging at his tie, I underestimated you. I tilted my head slightly. Yes, you did. He shifted, uncomfortable. I was wrong back then. About your abilities. About your presence. His words caught like gravel in his throat. I suppose congratulations are in order. For a moment, I studied him, this man who once decided my worth with the flick of a hand. The tables had turned so sharply it was almost dizzying, but instead of gloating, I felt something else. Clarity. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. Jonathan, I said, folding my arms, I don't need your apology. I didn't build this for validation. But if we're going to work together, there are conditions. His brows furrowed. Conditions? Yes, I replied firmly. Respect, first and foremost. Not just for me, but for every woman and man you'll encounter in this partnership. No more dismissing talent because it doesn't look like you expect. No more broken rulers. He blinked, clearly recalling the exact phrasing my grandmother once gave me. I leaned in slightly. Second, accountability. I expect results. No excuses, no shortcuts. You'll earn your seat at this table, Jonathan, just like everyone else. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. And third, I paused, letting the silence weigh on him. You'll mentor at least one young professional in this firm. Someone overlooked. Someone who reminds me of myself years ago. You'll help build what you once tried to deny me. His eyes widened, surprised. You want me to mentor? Yes, I said simply. Because growth isn't just about numbers. It's about undoing the damage we cause when we underestimate people. For the first time that day, Jonathan didn't argue. He simply lowered his gaze, perhaps realizing that the only way forward was through humility. I wasn't cruel. I didn't rub salt into old wounds. Compassion and firmness can coexist, and in that moment I chose both. Because power wasn't about crushing him, it was about shaping the dynamic on my terms. As he left the room, Daniel looked at me with quiet pride. You didn't just put him in his place, he said. You gave him a chance to change. I exhaled, the weight of years lifting off my chest. Exactly. This isn't about revenge. It's about rewriting the rules. And deep inside, I knew those conditions weren't just for Jonathan. They were for me too, a reminder of the woman I had become. A woman who no longer begged for a seat at someone else's table, but built her own and decided who could join. Weeks passed, and true to his word, Jonathan shifted. Slowly at first, less bravado in meetings, more listening than interrupting. I watched him mentor a young analyst named Chloe, a quiet but brilliant woman whose ideas had often been drowned out. Under Jonathan's reluctant guidance, her confidence bloomed, her voice steady, her ideas sharp. It was strange, almost poetic, seeing him nurture what he once dismissed in me. But the real change happened inside me. One evening, after a particularly long day, I sat alone in my office. The city glittered outside, the hum of life never pausing. I pulled out my grandmother's silver locket, the one that had been with me through rejection, ramen dinners, late-night victories, and boardroom battles. I ran my thumb over its smooth surface and opened it, staring at that tiny faded photo of her holding me as a child. Her words echoed in my mind. Never let someone else measure your worth with their broken ruler. For years, I had carried that as armor. Tonight, I carried it as truth. I thought back to the girl who once trembled in Jonathan's office, praying for approval that never came. She would never have imagined this version of herself, the woman with a voice, a vision, a company built brick by brick on resilience and faith. The woman who no longer hid her success, but wore it with grace. Daniel knocked lightly before stepping inside, his smile easy. Late night. Reflection, I replied, smiling softly. He glanced at the locket in my hand, then at me. She'd be proud. I swallowed the lump in my throat, feeling both the weight and the lightness of everything that had led me here. Yes, I whispered. She would. I closed the locket, placed it against my heart, and leaned back in my chair. For the first time, the journey didn't feel like a battle. It felt like a homecoming. The city outside sparkled, and I let the words form silently in my chest, a mantra, a truth, a closing chapter that was really only the beginning. The promotion he denied me wasn't the end. It was the spark that built my empire.